Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. All right, so I'm Martin.
I'm Francis.
And I'm Robert.
Welcome to Snakes and Otters. Just a quick reminder, you can interact with us on Twitter at Snakes and Otters, or you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com. New episodes drop every Friday at noon Eastern. So, I got something for you guys that I think you'll dig. I've been reading To Rule the Waves, How the British Navy Shaped the Modern World by Arthur Herman. And right off the bat, something that surprises me is that there is a religious dimension to the growth of the British Navy and how it came to be the most powerful one in the world.
Let me ask a question before we start.
Yes.
So, just to interrupt here, does this religious dimension have to do with sending the smaller British fleet at the time against the Spanish Armada? Because that was very much seen as a Protestant versus Catholic thing.
Yes, but it's more even than just that. It's the entire idea and the entire growth of the British Navy, the start, the impetus, it has a religious dimension.
Would this be something to the effect of they are the only Protestant power around?
Right.
And they see themselves as their duty to spread the virtues, shall we say, of Protestantism in the face of their two greatest naval rivals are hugely Catholic. Because the French kings for a long time were simply titled His Most Catholic Majesty. And Spain is well known, of course, for having expelled the Moors from Al-Andalus. So they have a long history from around the 1400s of being expressly so.
Mm-hmm. You guys, you nailed it exactly right on the head. The book talks about an author named John Fox who began this idea of Elizabeth as the savior, and savior is probably a strong word, but she is the exemplar of the Protestant cause against of course, to them, the forces of the Antichrist in the shape of the Pope and Philip II of Spain as his servant. It was a very powerful book that he wrote about the what they would call the Protestant martyrs. That
This is John Fox of Fox's Martyrs.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much.
Okay.
But what's interesting to me is how influential that book becomes to all the early sea captains. Drake, Martin Frobisher, and all of these guys are all familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing you bring up here, because I've never really thought about the religious aspect of this. But when you think about the history of the Catholic-Protestant divide, for anybody who follows history knows that what may have started as an attempt to reform the church, which was only the one church at the time, very quickly was co-opted into a political revolution.
Exactly.
Especially in the Germanies.
Yes.
Because remember, at that time, it was the Germanies, plural.
Right.
Yeah, there was no united.
Right.
At best, a loose association with being the Holy Roman Empire.
Right. And even that was still mostly the
non-existent.
Germanies. Yeah. But if you look at on land, the Protestant versus Catholic thing was very much Northern Europe, Southern and Western Europe. And most of the Protestant nations had no navy. Sweden had a bit of a navy. Denmark...
It sank half an hour after they launched it.
Well, the one did, yeah. I forget the name of it, but yeah.
The Vasa.
Yeah, the Vasa, yes, the Vasa.
The Vasa. It sailed, what is it, like 1,500 feet? And sank like a stone.
Yeah. That's a big ship. That's why it sank, yeah. But the Germanies, they weren't united. They were most of them were landlocked. They were a river power, if anything, when you want to talk about naval issues. The Austrians, of course, they were landlocked, the Austrian part of the Holy Roman Empire. The Italy's, because again, we're talking Italy's,
Yes.
the city-states.
The papal states and
the
city
papal
states, yeah.
They were concerned about what was going on in the Mediterranean more than anything else. So they were concerned more with the well, we would call them Turks today, but they wouldn't call themselves Turks, the Ottoman Empire. The only real naval rivals to England would have been
France and Spain.
Yes.
Which you see quite often because, of course, the Spanish Armada being the most notable. But my interesting question on this is, you're speaking of the early naval period.
Yes,
is
the
that
very
correct?
beginnings.
Very beginnings.
When you talk
Because
about
it's-
moving from the Tudors, the start of the Tudors and Henry VII, Henry VIII, the beginnings of the Navy, the beginnings of understanding they had to organize the Navy. Then, of course, Edward, the interregnum, I guess, of Mary. So then you have the reversion back to a Catholic state, and then Elizabeth.
Right.
So-
Which solidified the full Protestantism really didn't come into effect until Elizabeth's long reign.
Right,
That's
the
when
stability.
Stability is a great word for it if you're Protestant, but if you're Catholic, it would have been more like being a terror. That's when most people fled or were killed. It was illegal for priests to be in the country. It was illegal for them to celebrate Mass.
She finished what Henry started.
It's correct. She
Yeah,
basically
very much.
Catholicism was stamped out ultimately. That's why by the time she's finished, there's nobody to object. They've either left or they've been killed.
Yeah.
So
Well,
they're
and-
firmly Protestant by that time.
And all the property and capital that could be used to resist is gone as well.
That's correct.
Yes, Henry started that mostly. I think that
Yeah, the dissolution of the monasteries took place in the 1530s under Cromwell. This is after Thomas More's death, which would have been in 1535. So you're talking about really by 1542, it's done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It
And
was
that's very
remarkably
Henry
brief.
VIII. Yeah.
Because by 1540,
yeah, I mean,
1547, Henry is dead. So it didn't take very long, actually, at all, for this enormous wealth, both in land and in actual wealth, gold, etc., because there was a lot there.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was reclaimed and became crown property.
Movables, as they would have probably
That's
called it.
exactly it. Interestingly enough, Scotland was originally thought to be a haven for Catholics. Very soon turned to Methodism. By the time the early
Calvinism.
yeah, exactly. Which is basically by the time the 1600s are well underway, they're firmly Protestant as well, which is kind of strange.
As a matter of fact, they are more rabidly anti-Catholic in many ways by the 30 Years' War than many in England, because by the time you get to the 30 Years' War, which is the 1615 to 1645-ish, 1618 to 1648, you've got quite a bit of leniency, for lack of a better term, with the Stuart kings, because Charles I marries the French queen, who is of course Catholic, and is very much high church. But I think we're going kind of far off the topic here.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, this is awesome because I knew you would nail right into this, but I was, again, just stunned at this intersection between the politics of it that we've kind of always been familiar with, the Spanish Armada and okay, so then that means the Spaniards are basically no longer have access to the New World, and the New World becomes English. But there's a real religious zealotry to the start of the British Navy.
Very much so, and it was not just them. The Navy was just one aspect of it. Of course, it was the politicization, if you were, of religion, not necessarily the other way around. Because one of the reasons Protestantism was touted by Henry as being the point is, no foreign prince shall tell us how to interfere in our succession. So religion basically became political.
Well, it becomes a path to power.
That's correct.
Well, let's not lose sight of the fact that we're talking about what is essentially a time period at the start of the Renaissance, And there has really, since the end of the road, well, there has never been a time until modern times when religion and politics were separate. You know, the Roman Empire, the emperor was a god. You know, the
and
original
dictated the worship of other gods as well,
yes,
basically.
Yes, the early Christians were considered atheists because they did not worship the Roman gods. But, you know, and early laws, they're all based in religious ideals. And really, all good laws are, if you think about it. But that's, again, another discussion.
Even in time
That's okay. That's the whole point.
Even
We're
but
that's the
going
whole
all-
point. So
we're going all over the place.
yeah,
and that's
so
what we
I
love.
would not go so far as to say that it was the politicizing of religion or the other way around, however you want to talk about that, so much as, again, I think it goes back to how the again, what I jokingly call the Protestant revolt plays out. It's an excuse for solidifying political power. Now, in England, being an island nation, it's a lot easier. It's a lot harder to invade. I mean, heck, even Hitler didn't invade England. And, you know, he had a much better army than you know, the Germanys in the 1600s. So in England, it probably was a lot easier to do that because you didn't really have all these factions. But yeah, I think it's an excuse to solidify your power, not so much using religion as a tool. Because
religion was subsumed and consumed by politics, co-opted, if it were. It was a very useful tool, as you say.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that argument very much. Let's put it this way: we would call it the casus belli.
Very much so. And proof to this issue will be, and we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly, but you're talking about the early part of the British Navy, at the beginnings. Right. By the time of Napoleon, it's all over and done.
Oh, yes.
Because Napoleon is by no means, there's no religious issues betwixt them.
Right, yeah. That's
this is state versus state.
Yes.
This is economic power versus economic power. This is imperial power versus imperial power.
Well, and very much the post-revolution France, even of Napoleon, is not exactly friendly towards
any religion.
Any religion.
That's
It's
correct.
very anti-clerical. Very anti-clerical. So, I mean, that's part of...
most revolutions tend to be.
Yeah.
Although they
did
they did recognize, though, the place of that. I mean, the Pope was to have crowned Napoleon, although he decided to do it himself, of course.
Well,
the state coexisted within religion, within the religious backgrounds at this time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think
Mostly
you could say that Napoleon pulled back from the
very much so
from the terror.
Very much so, because that's when one of the reasons that Kentucky and the United States and Maryland and all those Catholic havens is because French priests left France during this time, because for once they already left England. They'd gone to France where they thought they had found a haven, and during the Revolution they found themselves, in fear for their lives. So they came here.
Yeah, that's probably
exactly one of the reasons. That's where all the French. That's where all the priests were.
And again, in our study of history, generally, we always see these developments as political. Military history. In school. Military history is political history. So that's, again, the interesting intersection that I've hit with this book is, wow, this has this very huge religious dimension.
How intentional was this creation of the British Navy as a tool of spreading the Protestant faith? Was it very intentional?
Very, yes. So that's part of the case that he's making here. Again, it was seen as a way to protect Elizabeth.
Yes.
It was done in her name because she is the exemplar now of the forces of Christ in their minds, again, against the Antichrist, which is represented by the Pope.
Well, they also recognize the fact that Protestantism, while it may be solid in England, is by no means a done deal on the continent. It could easily be snuffed out. Mm-hmm. They see themselves as potentially not existing.
I don't know if snuffed out, but marginalized, perhaps.
I would argue that in this sense, because of the nature of the Holy Roman Empire being, I don't know, there was going back to my days of studying under Maggie Mahoney at university, although it was college then, something like over 500 electors of the Holy Roman Empire. Now that's imperial cities, as well as principalities and counties,
the small states, and
yeah. So every one of those would have been. And this is a time when the ruler. This is one of the early compromises between Protestantism and Catholicism, is that the ruler gets to decide what religion his people will follow. So depending on the notions of any particular successor to one of these electors in the Holy Roman Empire, they could go from Catholic to Lutheran to Calvinist to whatever, and back, all within one person's lifetime. And so a lot of the people, I think, kind of got divorced from the whole idea, the princes are going to do what the princes are going to do. But I think as far as being able to be snuffed out, I don't know. Because I think from the very nature...
By 1600, when Elizabeth died, that is correct. There was no danger at that time. But you have to remember, Elizabeth reigned for almost 50 years.
And that's
in the early days of her, particularly in the days of the Spanish Armada, it came damn close.
Well, in England, it certainly would have if the Armada had not been
that
defeated.
Is correct. They were the only major power at this point that was Protestant. The Germanys and a few other places like that could have easily been surrounded and overcome if they could take this one down. That's the whole point of the Armada.
The point of this is Philip II is very close to master of the world.
That's correct.
He is master of Spain, master of Portugal.
By proxy, yeah.
He has combined their fleets now and has overrun the Low Countries, essentially.
Yes.
He has a skilled and seasoned army with a good leader. He has high-quality navy. The place where and he sees himself as a defender of the Catholic Church as well.
Yes.
So England has no serious army.
No colonies.
No, and so they very much see not only his defeat, but again, this idea that if we can defeat him, then the new world becomes ours. And it should be ours. We are the truth and the light, and we are the representatives of the true Christ. So we should be in control of the new world. So it's a very interesting setup going into the Armada and the near invasion of England.
Which it's a segue question, but it's always been one that I have pondered as a really incredible what if. If Henry, with his first wife, or even his second wife, or maybe even his third wife, because I forget which one it was that caused the break with the Pope.
It was between the first and the second.
It was between the first and the second.
And Boleyn.
Okay. So, if that first wife had produced a male heir that lived, there would not have been a religious revolution.
Exactly, yes.
In England.
So it would not have been of the type we saw. Henry was a great defender of the faith. He even wrote a book defending the Seven Sacraments.
Well, presuming Thomas More didn't write it for him.
Well, as More himself would say, it was first to last the king's own project. But he did answer certain questions for him. However, the Protestantism tide was looking for a haven. Henry may or may not have done so. I don't believe truly had Catherine of Aragon had let's just make it simple, the male heirs that she bore, because she did bear him too, had they survived and continued forward into life, Henry sooner or later tired of her, big time. I do not think that even if she had had legitimate heirs, he would have not found a way to break.
Well,
however,
plus he didn't like being told what to do. Anyway,
that's part of it. But the reason, if you study that story, if you really want to know why he chose Protestantism, it wasn't in his nature to do so. That was Anne Boleyn. That was absolutely Anne Boleyn. She was the one who's co-opted. She was the one who read the books. They were forbidden, but hey, she's Anne Boleyn. She can get away with it. She read it. She's the one that brought it to him and said, you want a way out of this problem you've got? You can't get rid of this wife of yours? Read this book. That's how it started. So if you want to remove a player from the chessboard to change history, she's the one. Irony of ironies, without her, there's no Elizabeth.
Well, but see, you're presuming that with a male heir, he needs to get rid of her. He's the king of England. He doesn't need to get rid of his wife to sleep around.
Well, that was always he was doing that anyway.
Right.
He was
he needed to get rid of his first wife to get another wife to produce a living male heir. So again, it goes back to my point: is if he had a living male heir with Catherine, he could have gone around, kept on sleeping with whoever he wanted, and everything. There would have never been a need to read that book to get out of a situation, because there would have been no situation to get out of.
Well, yes and no. If falling for Anne Boleyn, who really is the crux of all this, she would not tolerate being his mistress, because that's all he wanted from her. And she says, hell no, you will make me a queen, or you ain't getting it, Charlie. And he didn't, for a long time. And it really wasn't a matter of whether or not he had a male heir or not. Really didn't matter. He wanted her. Remove her. Is there anybody else that would have taken the mantle on that she did? Was there anybody else as forthright and as unbelievably ballsy as she was? The answer is probably no.
Well,
but he had the people in his orbit, though. The intellectual people in his orbit that brought him there were influenced as well.
Oh, absolutely.
They were Protestant influencing, and again, I think
they had to be
only once Anne allowed them to be.
Yeah,
because she was able to get him to bring back into the country, or allow into the country, or allow to rise those individuals like Thomas Cranmer and a few others in order to become in positions of power that were Protestant sympathetic.
Well, it had to be more than just that, though, because almost no bishops and priests didn't join Henry. That is an astounding thing when you think about it. So that influence had to have been there, or at least a lot of willingness. Now, whether that's want to stay in good favor of the king, poor intellectual and religious formation, if you're a Catholic, that's how you would look at it, or whatever.
Why did the bishops knuckle under?
Right.
That's exactly the way the line reads in A Man for All Seasons. And there were very few that protested. Bishop Fisher, St. John Fisher. Being the most notable that did. The issue is, you're right, there was a weakness as regards to the faith in there. There was a corruption and a secularization of the church. Wolsey himself was a cardinal and also Chancellor of England. The two, as you mentioned earlier, nowhere was state and church more seamlessly blended than in England at that time. They were essentially the same functions.
He was Richelieu before Richelieu came about.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And he was the state in many ways. Yeah. So when it's easy for you to find, when they're already a wing of the palace, it's another line from Man for All Seasons, then you'll find that it's pretty easy to say, okay, you like all this stuff you've got. The only way you get it is through me. And he was right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons.
I mean, there's certainly
purity, selfishness,
an ego at play with Henry VIII, again, that he's not going to be told what to do for long. Even with a male heir from Catherine of Aragon.
That's correct. Well, Anne Boleyn tried, and she lost her head eventually.
Yeah, I mean, he's eventually going to see that, or feel that, hey, I have a path to power, and it needs to be away from Rome. So let me pause for just a moment. I need to pour myself another little shot of bourbon. So listeners, you hear that glass
Woodford
clink?
Reserve, by the way.
Yes, good stuff. Never drink crap bourbon, people.
Although, even bad bourbon is still bourbon.
And it's better than that stuff they make in Tennessee that ends in EY.
That's right.
Well,
Yes. Anything that is called bourbon that is not made in the great state of Kentucky should be illegal to be called bourbon.
It's not bourbon.
That's right. That is entirely a different show.
Yeah, entirely a different show.
Well, as
anything that ends in EY, don't drink. That's from Canada and Tennessee. Horrible places.
As they said in the movie Fort
Great,
Apache.
you've just pissed off an entire country.
They won't know.
Tennessee, we don't care about.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I mean, the Canadians will just go, eh.
Yeah, that's true. They're so polite. They'll
so
probably
polite.
say, "Oh, I'm sorry we offended you."
Yeah.
As they said,
We're sorry you offended us.
As they said in the great movie Fort Apache, it's better than no whiskey at all.
Not by much.
So, how long did it take to make this? So this is even not even a second thought. And we talked about by Napoleon, it's state versus state. So, how long was this an organized, intentional effort, as opposed to this is just the way things are because this is the way we've always done it?
No, I mean, it's very much at the start of Elizabeth's reign.
Right.
Again, it's all pulled into that John Fox Martyr's book.
Sure.
And again, that's so widely spread among these sea captains.
Right, but how long until it's no longer an intentional thing where you think about it? All right, this is our purpose. This is, as opposed to, well, of course, this is the way we do things.
Cromwell was an extremely successful naval commander. That's one of
Which
his.
one?
Oliver. Yes, slipping forward into the 1600s
Yes.
here, during the Protectorate. And that's one. And in fact, he was able to quite literally run circles around just about everybody else at this point here. So I would say by the time of the Protectorate, it's no longer it's become part of the deal. We are a Protestant state now, and we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to intentionally go out and worry about it.
Ironically,
it's who we are.
Not just a Protestant state, but a Puritan state.
That's correct. That's right. Which now that did not last, of course.
No.
And Charles II was brought back with all due pomp and circumstance. However, he still had to toe the Protestant line.
Even though he was what we would call a crypto-Catholic himself.
Very much. A libertine is also what he was. And
Yes.
You want to talk?
Of course, you can go to confession.
That's right. Well, you think Henry was a horn dog. Charles II put him to shame.
Yes.
Absolutely. But everybody liked Charles. He was actually a likable guy.
Well, he also brought back a little bit of fun.
Absolutely.
To the country. He was also known for hanging out with actresses, which was synonymous with being a whoremonger.
That's right.
At the time.
He had no legitimate children, actually. It was only his when he passed away, his brother James comes to the throne, who, gasp, he was married to a Catholic. Well, they were able to tolerate that until he produces a male heir. And who is going to be raised Catholic, not Protestant.
That's right out.
That was right out. And that's what brings about what they call the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange comes in, marries Charles and James's younger sister, and there's no turning back.
No turning back.
It's by the end.
But then you got the Battle of the Boyne and the whole deal, and the abdication, and
the Krauts have been sitting on the throne ever since.
Yep, it's all German since then.
That's right. The Scots tried, but we know how that ended.
Yeah, I mean, we could go into a whole 2 episodes about Jacobitism and.
Yeah.
That's basically the success of where we end.
Yeah, I mean, you start getting me talking about Culloden and throwing all the Scots out of the country into America, and that's why I'm here. And hello.
Well, yeah, and our ancestors were waiting for you because we were the Catholics who were already here.
Yeah,
that left 100 years earlier.
Oddly enough, mine were apparently Protestant, but they were here in the early 1600s myself. So interesting. We all have roots that go back prior to the Revolution.
That's right.
Which I like that.
Yeah.
Well, boys, we are near the end of the show. I think for a first effort, not a bad show.
Well, the bourbon helps.
Bourbon always helps.
It gives us, what was the word that we used earlier? Lubricity. Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters. New episodes every Friday. Be sure to spread the word on your own social media accounts and follow us and retweet us. Find us on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
And when you share our messages and our podcasts on your social media, let them know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. Just search Snakes and Otters to listen.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Thanks for joining us.
This has been Snakes and Otters. Thanks for letting us into your head. We plan to live there rent-free for a long, long time.